You are watching George Schlacek.
The one and only.
Hello and welcome to Bicycle Touring Talk. This is episode number 30, and we're still following my adventures of the first big bicycle tour I ever did. This tour changed me so much, I've written a book about it. And as always, there's a link in the description. I was transitioning from one life to another. That tour was the first big thing I did after my divorce. It was all about experiencing a sort of freedom I had not had in years. But it was also a way of coping with the loss that had come from family breakup. I knew that my life was at a turning point and was trying to find my way into the next chapter by completely escaping the world I had known and taken for granted. For me, the tour had no ultimate destination. Cancun was just a point on the map from where I'd be able to make it back to Canada before my money would run out. However, what was the point of returning to Canada if there was the possibility of having a life in Mexico? My options were wide open, and while I had a female friend in Canada, there wasn't really any plan for me back home. That was why I was very excited about having met a lady in Veracruz who was obviously interested in me. After leaving Catemaco, I was very driven to get to Coatzacoalcos to meet up with Muriel again. A seriously rough day awaited me on the road. I had been drinking rum by the beer glass and smoked cigarettes the night before, neither of which I usually do. Now I was finding out that this had been a bad idea, as I was trying to undertake a 100-kilometer ride across rolling hills. I was also finding out that riding a loaded touring bicycle, there's no such thing as rolling hills. Phil, the motorcycle guy from the hostel by the lake Catemaco, had told me this was going to be an
Easy ride.
Sure, cruising up and down those hills on a motorcycle, it would have felt great on this winding road. On the bicycle, however, it meant hours of grueling climbs in exchange for a 30-second descent every so often. To top things off, it was one of the hottest days of my trip. I could feel the sun burn up my skin right through the sunscreen. All the while I was battling dehydration. At one point I stopped at a store and drank an entire liter of ice-cold water in one shot, only to buy a bottle of Gatorade immediately after. Eventually, the sun lost its intensity. Daylight wasn't gonna last much longer. Just before dark, I arrived at the outskirts of Acacuyan, where a 4-story hotel caught my eye. The place seemed to be brand new, but at the same time it looked so typically Mexican that it almost intrigued me. To my surprise, a room was just 200 pesos. Considering that everything was new and the place had AC, free internet, and cable TV, this was a bargain. After checking in, I walked to a store to get a ready-made sandwich and some snacks for dessert. I had already forgotten my hangover, so I also bought a couple of cold beers to enjoy before bed. I didn't have enough energy left to venture out into the town. Instead, I decided to watch a movie in my room. I must have passed out right in the middle of it. When I woke up again in the middle of the night, I found out that the hotel had a flaw. Sound was traveling in strange ways across the stairwells. One of the rooms obviously had a party going on. It had to be a get-together of at least half a dozen young girls. They were loud enough to wake me up at 1 in the morning. But I never got to see any of them. After what seemed like a small eternity, it finally got quiet. But now I was wide awake, watching strange shadows coming through the curtain above the door. Perhaps a window was open in the hallway, but the place was spooky at night. It took a while to fall asleep again. The ride was much easier the following day. The road was flat and the sunshine less intense. I easily made it to Coatzacoalcos by late afternoon. Now there was just one thing on my mind. My next encounter with Muriel. I had her address, but had to get oriented around town and find the place. I figured I could just show up at her place and surprise her. The rest was gonna be just peaches. See, I was convinced that Muriel was a single woman in her mid-40s who had a thing for me. It seemed a pretty safe bet that all I had to do was find her, kind of the way she had dropped in on me in Veracruz, and this would ensure a good time and probably a place in her warm bed. Finding the address she had written down was easy enough. After some asking around and walking the bike across town, I ended up in front of a stationery store. Did this mean she worked here? Or perhaps her apartment was in the building above the store? It was time to find out, so I stepped inside. The man behind the counter asked if he could help me. "Do you know Muriel?" I asked in Spanish. He nodded. When I went on to ask if she was around, his expression changed. His eyes were staring me down, but he remained calm and told me that she should be around the next day. Of course, I was disappointed, but I still had plenty of time to find a cheap hotel, something I had become quite good at. I found a $12 room right in the shady part of town. Then I went on a hike across the city that led me to a great little restaurant for supper, and finally an internet cafe. I figured that if I sent an email to Muriel right away, I might have a response in less than an hour and perhaps a date. After a whole hour at the computer, it was time to go. No response. I enjoyed my walk back to the hotel. Coatzacoalcos reminded me a lot of Veracruz. I immediately liked it here. After a night in a sticky, windowless room with a noisy ceiling fan, I checked out of the hotel right away, still thinking I wasn't going to need it for another night. Even if Muriel wasn't going to be able to accommodate me, there had to be a better place than this. It was Saturday morning, and I decided to give that stationery store another try. The guy in the store had said Muriel might be around. I still had no idea why the man in the store had stared at me. When I stepped into the place again, Muriel wasn't there. But the man behind the counter was still looking at me strangely. It felt weird, so I left the place. I walked around the neighborhood, pushing my bike and contemplating how I could get a hold of my friend, when a young lady approached me. I was pretty sure she was trying to sell me some marijuana, asking if I wanted
Dope.
dope. However, she quickly changed her tune when my reaction wasn't favorable. She was an attractive-looking blonde, probably in her late 20s, and spoke good English.
Local information.
She admitted.
Not weed. Dope, you know.
We started chatting, and when it turned out she lived less than a block from the stationery store, I asked her about Muriel. Oh, of course she knew Muriel.
She was older, right? And did you know she's married?
Shit. I shook my head in disbelief. Yes, she was talking about my Muriel.
Who was a bit older. Nice slim build with curves in all the right places. Beautiful long black hair, and while she's pretty, she's also very intelligent. She's even a licenciada. But definitely married.
The girl went on to show me some hair clips that Muriel had sold her. No, she didn't really know her that well, but enough to know her husband. Yes, he was the man in the store. Yikes. I was crushed. What was I gonna do? Go to Muriel's husband and ask him if he wouldn't mind me hanging out with his wife for the weekend? The girl introduced herself as Bonnie. She must have sensed my confusion and said something about Muriel being of an
older generation and very career-minded.
but explained that she too was a
Licenciada.
which meant she had a degree. As if that was relevant in any way, I ended up spending my day with Bonnie, which wasn't too shabby at all, and came with a few surprises as well. Bonnie didn't mind showing me all over town. We drove to the beach in her dad's minivan. There was a boulevard all along the beach, several monuments, and a promenade, even a bicycle trail. Some apartment buildings across from the beach were painted very colorful in artistic fashion. I liked Coatzacoalcos even more now. On the way back to Bonnie's place, we first stopped to pick up some beer. Afterwards, we had to pick up her son Bernie at a friend's house. Bonnie's friend Margarita was quite attractive and dressed to highlight the shape of her body. She made it a point to let me know that she was
Wealthy, single, and lonely.
and she was going to get butt implants. I could hardly believe my ears and probably rolled my eyes a few times while listening to Margarita. When we left, I had her email address and her username on some dating site. Bonnie confirmed.
Yes, Margarita is rich. Her family owns 3 hotels in town. Besides that, she's also a very nice person, if a little insecure at times.
Sure, I was interested, but had she really said she was getting butt implants? Bonnie drove us back to her family's place where we shared the 6-pack of beer. They were jumbo cans of Sol. We each had 3 in a relatively short time, and I definitely felt the effect. It surprised me when Bonnie left the house again to drive her son to soccer practice without even hesitating. Driving under the influence was perfectly acceptable to her.
As long as you were careful.
I stayed behind with her parents, who also seemed fine with the idea. I was quietly shaking my head in disbelief. Later, Bonnie's dad took us on a little sightseeing trip of Coatzacoalcos. There was an impressive new bridge nearby that had a bronze statue of a naked man, complete with all the private parts at its ramp. Perhaps there was something in the city's drinking water that had an ever so slight effect on people's psyche. I was fine with most of it, except that as a cyclist, I have a pretty strong opinion about drinking and driving. Bonnie's family was very hospitable, and I was offered a place to sleep in a patio chair on the porch. It sounded pretty good to me. I was due for a free night. After dark, I told Bonnie that I needed to take a walk to the internet cafe in order to check my email. I still had a glimmer of hope that Muriel might have responded to my message and perhaps wasn't really married to that guy in the store. Bonnie told me I was welcome to use her computer, which I gladly accepted. There was no message. Later we talked some more before everyone went to bed. Mine was just a lawn chair out on the porch, which I thought was fine. It turned out to be a terrible idea. At night, the place was infested with mosquitoes. I was sitting in the chair, wrapped up in my sleeping bag, which was way too warm, just so the buggers wouldn't eat me alive. All the while I was wondering about Muriel and what could have been. It was by far the most uncomfortable night of the trip. So I pretty much got screwed there. But at the same time, I had made some new connections. I'll get back to that story later. But in the next episode, I'd like to talk about making those social connections while on a long-term bicycle tour by yourself. I've got a few insights to share, so if this interests you, join me for it. Hey, subscribing is always free, so do it now and please hit the like button too. Can't get enough? Watch one of the videos I've got popping up right here.